Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this session of the EHRA Talks series. My name is Zanarada, and I am the Youth Coordinator for EHRA and the moderator for tonight's event. EHRA Talks is a series put on for youth and by youth. This is our fourth session, and it is titled Finding Your Path, and we will hear from an esteemed panel of speakers on how they have translated their passions for environmental health and justice into a career. In November, we were joined by State Representative Abdullah Hamoud to discuss air quality in Southeast Dearborn and how we, as members of this community, can advocate for our rights. If you missed the session and would like to watch it, the recording can be found on our EHRA website. If this is your first time joining an EHRA event, we are so glad that you're here with us today. For some context, EHRA stands for Environmental Health Research to Action. We are a community academic partnership focused on building skills and intergenerational knowledge in environmental health, community science, and policy advocacy to address cumulative and environmental exposures in Dearborn, Michigan, and nearby communities. To start off this session, we would like to get to know our audience a little better. Dr. Sampson will be sharing 2 questions in the chat right now. The first being, where are you from? If you're comfortable, you could specify your current city, your county, or your zip code. And our second question is, what career are you interested in, currently pursuing, or occupying right now? And it's completely okay to be undecided. So feel free to type in your answers in the chat. Dearborn, Michigan, cool.
The chat is disabled.
Oh, I see. Thank you for letting me know. Are you available to put right now?
Yes, no, it's
perfect. Thank you again. Mechanical engineering, that's cool. Social policy. These are all great answers. Thank you everyone for participating, and you could continue to type in your answers in the chat if you want. Before we begin hearing from our panelists, I would just like to run through a few housekeeping items. First, we are recording this session, so you're more than welcome to just listen in if you're not comfortable turning on your camera. For tonight's agenda, we will begin by hearing brief remarks from our panelists about their journey towards their career. We will then be joined by Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist to hear a few remarks from him as well. And finally, we'll go into a Q&A session where we will open the floor to questions from the audience. With that being said, I'd like to start off our discussion by briefly introducing our wonderful speakers tonight. And after that, our panelists will give brief personal narratives in the order in which I introduced them. To our audience in the meantime, feel free to type out any questions you may have for the panelists in the chat. So without further ado, please give a warm virtual welcome to Dr. White-Newsome, the CEO and founder of the strategic consultancy Empowering a Green Environment and Economy. Ms. Ignaczak, founder, publisher, and editor of the digital media startup Planet Detroit. Dr. Charles, a clinical associate professor of environmental health sciences at the University of Michigan School of Public Health. And Mr. Bashi, an attorney at Great Lakes Environmental Law Center. Dr. White-Newsome, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you so much, Zena, for the kind introduction and for the opportunity to be here this evening. I hope you all are safe and well. And before I begin, I always start off these conversations recognizing the original lands that I'm on here in West Bloomfield, Michigan, the lands of the Mississauga. So my passion for the environment, for people, for health and justice was really ignited growing up in Detroit, and really by my family and my community and the value system they actually imparted on me. And so I was fortunate enough to grow up in a family that pursued their passions, they knew their purpose, and they cared about people. So my schoolgirl crush on the environment started with my first science fair project, studying the impact of diesel emissions on plant growth, again, from my mom's garage in Detroit. And it went on to testing water quality in the Rouge River. And I realized really quickly that pollution did not only impact our natural environment, but also the health of people, particularly low-income communities and communities of color. And so while I was at Renaissance High School, I had the opportunity to work at Dow Chemical Corporation in Midland for a couple of summers. And it was in a minority engineering program. So shout out to the mechanical engineer in the house. And that was when I really first learned what environmental justice was, or what it should be, because it solidified for me that as a chemical company and as other for-profit industries, you know, they had the power to pollute communities that actually end up not only damaging the environment, but damaging people. And so because of this historic insult, continuous insult on people and extractive processes that have not been kind nor protective of communities, it is something that has happened decades ago and continues right now. And that's what really triggered, like, oh my gosh, you know, we need to do something about this. And so I went on to do undergrad in Evanston, Illinois. And again, environmental justice was something that I didn't want to just leave in Detroit or Midland. And I was working for the Northwestern Daily and had an opportunity to interview communities on the South Side of Chicago, this organization called People for Community Recovery. And they had been protesting lead smelters, highways, and a whole bunch of issues, again, all rising up around environmental injustice. And from that point on, it was so solidified that environmental racism was something that was pervasive in communities across this country. And the fact that low-income communities and communities of color were suffering by no fault of their own was something I wanted to tackle in every professional position that I held. And so that's what I've tried to do. And so whether it was my time in state government for the state of Maryland, working for their Department of Environmental Quality, whether it was working for a science-based advocacy group in DC, or really helping elevate the voices of communities of color across this country on federal policy, or even using my research at the School of Public Health at the University of Michigan to really talk about the concerns of seniors and the impacts of climate and extreme heat and flooding, or even working in philanthropy for the past 5 years and trying to get grants and money to these organizations that are uplifting these voices that are often silenced. My passion and my purpose has always revolved around the protection of people, particularly those communities that continue to remain invisible and don't have a voice sometimes. And so I truly believe that this kind of circuitous path that, that I've been on has led me to what I'm doing now, and starting my own consulting firm where our mission is to, in fact, transform communities using people-centered solutions. And we focus on tackling those issues that are at this intersection of climate change, public health, and racial inequity. And so even after all these years, I'm still that little girl that wants to protect the environment and the people that live in it. And I want to make sure that everybody has a quality and quantity of life they deserve, despite their income, race, gender, or the zip code where they live. So that's a little bit of my story. And I hope that as you all think about a career in this space, in this big space, I'd encourage you to keep people first, to understand your own biases you bring to this work, bring humility, and challenge the norm, because the norms that we subscribe to are not always normal. So I look forward to the discussion. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dr. White-Newsome. Ms. Ignaczak?
Can everybody hear me? Great. Hi, my name is Nina Ignaczak, and I am the founder and publisher of an environmental news startup called Planet Detroit. You can find us at planetdetroit.org. And we launched about a year and a half ago in response to what I saw as a real lack of quantity and quality of reporting on the environment, specifically around local issues. My career path is a little bit circuitous, so for those of you that maybe don't know exactly what you want to do right now or you want to change, I guess I'm here to tell you that's maybe okay. I spent the first 15 years of my career after college. I studied biology, thinking I wanted to go into medicine. And then I figured out I didn't want to do that. And I ended up going to the University of Michigan for a master's degree in environmental science, and worked in urban planning for almost 15 years. And so in my urban planning life, I worked mainly with local governments and groups, nonprofits, on trying to find ways to preserve the local environment through municipal planning processes and through volunteer projects and those kinds of things. Did a lot of mapping and resource inventories and those sorts of things, but always had kind of a calling and like something that would just not leave me alone about wanting to write and do journalism. It was something that I'd sort of thought I was going to do maybe in high school, and then went to college, and everybody kept saying the journalism industry is falling apart. And so I went in a different direction. And the journalism industry is actually still falling apart. But I think one of the bright spots, one of the potential future ways that we may still continue to have media is through these kind of smaller independent nonprofit startup news organizations. And so Planet Detroit is one of those, and we are kind of one in an ecosystem of such organizations in Metro Detroit and across the country. We started doing this. I was working as a I worked in media after my career in planning for about 7 years before starting Planet Detroit, and was doing a lot of freelancing, and started just a newsletter, a weekly newsletter, kind of summarizing what I could find about local news related to the environment, and trying to kind of bring it all into one place and send it out, and was really surprised how quickly the email list was growing. And over the last 18 months, we've managed to garner quite a bit of grant funding to support our journalism. We have paid memberships. We were able to do a fundraiser at the end of last year. So it's certainly not to the point where we are making a profit or even breaking even. But we are, I think, on a path to sustainability. We may not be, quote unquote, scalable. So, I feel like what we're doing is very authentic and close to the grassroots. And, I think one of the problems in media is trying to make everything bigger and bigger and bigger until it kind of breaks under its own weight. So I think our intention is to stay small and stay beholden to the community of readers that trusts us for good information. And so that's what we're trying to do. We have a few projects we're working on this year. We're looking to develop a tour of Metro Detroit's environmental sites. So those may be locations where there's been contamination and cleanup, or key locations where there's been restoration. And it'll be kind of a self-guided tour to help people envision the alternative futures of sites. We have some reporting projects that we're working on related to lead poisoning, related to Black-owned sustainability businesses, related to environmental health impact assessments. So if you're interested in learning more about the environment in Detroit and staying up to date, please check out our website and subscribe to our email newsletter. It's free, comes out on Fridays. I'm going to be working on it tonight, making sure that I catch all the typos. And we also publish things like local jobs, and ways to get outside. One of the things that we're trying to do, especially with our paid membership, is finding ways to help people connect with one another, and find ways for them to connect with the environment that they all care about, so that we're really kind of not only building a news organization, but building a community along with it. As far as, I guess, like my personal drive and passion to do this, like I said, I thought I was going to go into medicine. That was like the thing to do back in the 90s. Still is, I guess. But through my studies in college, I think I grew up in a pretty urban area, and so I hadn't really been exposed to the natural environment. But through being kind of closer to it at college and also learning about biology, I became really fascinated and interested in the environment. One thing I will say with respect to environmental justice, a lot of my earlier career working in environmental planning did not really deal with environmental justice whatsoever. In fact, especially when working with local municipal governments, that was a topic that was verboten in a lot of cases, something that we just sort of talked around or didn't address. And so that was one of the reasons why I wanted to leave that career, because I felt like when working for government, and I know this is changing, so I'm dating myself and showing my age, but when working for government, you're often beholden to whoever is in political power at the time. And so I didn't feel like it was a career that I could pursue truth in, I guess, so to speak. So yeah, this is what I'm doing now. It's not the only thing that I'm doing. I'm still freelancing and, working as a journalist in the trenches to help support this. But it's been an interesting kind of meandering route for me. So if any of you are ever interested in talking about media or just, changing careers kind of midstream, I'm happy to chat.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Dr. Charles?
Hi, thank you. So interesting listening to everyone's journey. Thank you guys for having me today, this afternoon, and I really hope everyone's doing well, both mentally and physically. So for me, I'd start by, I love quotes. I think to some extent I'm creative, I don't know, but I love quotes. And so I wanted to start with a quote. And the quote is from an anonymous source, but it says, "There is not one path. There is not even the right path. There is only your path. And you know it's yours by how it feels to you." And for me, that quote spoke to where I am today and why I'm in environmental justice, because it feels right to me. And it's the path I chose for myself. And it may not be the right path. There are days that I go to work and I wonder, okay, is this the right path? But it feels right to me. So I believe it is so. For me, it started with a lot of introspection. When I was young, my parents said that you had to go to undergrad. They themselves were educators, having not been raised in a well-off community. So they found advancement through education. So we didn't really have a choice. That said, I didn't know at the time what I wanted to do. So I just said, well, I will go to undergrad and I will do the things that I'm passionate about. I loved geography, I loved chemistry, and I loved biology. So I did those things. And so I focused my interest there. But then by then I was old enough to kind of do the introspection of, okay, so now what? And so I said, okay, what am I really interested in? What makes me wake up in the morning? And at that time, before I could really figure out what I wanted to go forward and do, I spent some time teaching at a high school in the south of my nation. I'm from the Caribbean, and in that country, the school I taught at was about an hour from my house. And so the kids were different in the sense of the class I taught really needed a lot of encouragement to recognize their own gifts. And a lot of people had somewhat written them off. And I just loved teaching them. It was the best time. I think back on those days so warmly. But why I bring that up is because I think it told me what was my next step. It helped me identify what those next steps were. And it helped me see myself better. So that's where that introspection came back in, where I began to understand what my gifts and my passions and my values, and that encouraging others, however it might look, was important to me. To get up every morning, make the journey of an hour to go to teach and come back. It helped me formulate what that looked like. And so, again, I bring up my parents. They were very heavily, coming from the country region of my nation, were very focused on the land and the value of the land around them. And particularly my father, he actually was the first person I knew who did recycling. And I always wondered, okay, Daddy, just throw it out. But he doesn't throw things out. Everything has another alternative use. And despite the fact that it often frustrated me as a child that things would not get tossed out, I realized that I was already learning the principles of environmental stewardship from him at an early age. And I would do some of these activities with him. I bring that up to say that not only my own internal perspectives or my personal choices, it was also external factors like my parents and what their values were and what the values they instilled in us were. That brings me to where I am today. And so from that, in addition, I myself have always been introspective. And so at the same time being a little clueless, I remember I'll say taught Sunday school, and the priest under whom I taught called me a tumbleweed because I couldn't seem to figure out how to teach Sunday school the way he wanted me to teach. But I think that's an important aspect of myself and my journey, because it allows me to balance multiple things at the same time and focus my attentions on multiple things. And when you're working in the environmental justice space, you'll find that you have to focus on a lot of things at the same time. And so blending my creativity, being an encourager, being very analytical, being a bit argumentative, loyal, and faithful, bringing all those things together, I found public health. And so I did my further degrees in actually environmental chemistry and toxicology, and then blended that with public health. And so it got me to the environmental health space. And then I kept asking, okay, how can I encourage others? How can I continue to encourage others in this space, in using this academic trajectory? And that's when I found environmental justice. Now I'm in a different land compared to myself, but that doesn't, to where I grew up, I should say, but that does not mean that my interest areas for empowering people around me wasn't heightened. And so I found communities that would benefit from my training or felt like that would be useful to them, and presented myself and said, you know, how can I help make a difference here? And allow those communities to speak back to me as to, I see your question, Nick, I'll answer it in a minute, and allow those communities to allow me into their space, and then to see how I can be useful to them. And so I've done work in Georgia, in a rural space in Georgia. If you guys know Savannah, Georgia, from that, there's a novel that incorporates Savannah, Georgia. So I was in a rural town an hour west of Savannah, and working with farm workers and bringing change there, working with small towns where there's one traffic light in the town, and working with them around tobacco cessation, working with Flint communities, now that I'm back in Michigan, around lead contamination in the water, and then bringing what I have to the table and saying, hey, this is what I have to offer. How can I be useful to you? And so I continue to do this work, again, continuing to blend my passion for working with adolescents. I think it's such a wonderful age where the passions of youth can be tapped into. And so that's the population I work with in the environmental justice space. And I just really love it. And so for me, it's about internal factors, personal choices, external factors that kind of got me to where I am today. And I would encourage you also to look into those things. You know, it's, as I saw today, it's really about an equation of G plus P plus V, which are your gifts, your passions, your values. I would add your A, your academic trajectory, whatever that may be, and blending all of them and finding a space to make a difference in this world. And environmental justice gives you a nice space to do that. So the last quote I'll end with, as I said, I love quotes, is out of suffering have emerged the strongest souls. The most massive characters are seared with scars. And I just want to put that there because not every path is easy, and how you get to your destination, it may not be easy, but it's worth the fight. It's worth the effort because the most massive characters are seared with scars. So just keep walking. As my father says, keep on keeping on. And to answer Nick's question, I am from Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean. So thank you for listening and allowing me to share.
Thank you so much for sharing your powerful story. Appreciate it. Mr. Bashi, your turn.
Thanks so much, guys. First off, I'm just so excited to be here talking with you guys, and I wish it could be in person, and you know, God willing, one day that'll be the case. But I have to say off the bat that this probably is the first time that I've been on a panel where I have felt like, oh wow, I'm not going to be the only person talking about having a path that just went all over the place. And so I appreciate the openness of the other panelists. And I think it's really telling of the reality, right? That a lot of times we hear folks like frame their story in a way that sounds like it was this like super straight path. They knew exactly what they were going to do since the day they came out the womb, right? But the reality is that, you know, life is complicated, right? And we are complicated, and interests change, and we learn new things about ourselves every day. And so I think I just really appreciate the candor of the other panelists, and am very proud to say that I am among them in terms of someone that has had just a really interesting path that brought me to something that I just absolutely love, and something that I really am proud of doing. So I'm originally from Michigan, and I grew up in the suburbs of Michigan, or of Detroit, and really I had an interesting childhood. I think generally pretty great childhood in terms of like my family life. You know, I'm really close to my family, close to my cousins, and that played a really big role for me. But there was also some challenges, and really the biggest one was I grew up with basically the only brown kid in my school, and because of that, I got a lot of bullying. There was a lot of kids picked on me because of that. I didn't really have a whole lot of friends, basically until probably about like 5th or 6th grade. And it was really difficult, right? It was difficult, you know, trying to navigate as a young kid, understanding like, why aren't people liking, like, why don't they like me? What did I do? What's wrong with me? And you internalize some of that stuff, even though, you know, looking back at it, you're like, well, they were just kids. Like, they didn't know any better, right? But you don't realize sometimes until later on how much it really impacts you. And I feel very lucky in a way, because the way that I was impacted by that was that it really, I think it really drummed up my sense of empathy, right? That I started, instead of being angry all the time about it, that I would see other people that were being bullied, or other people that were kind of subjugated to second class. And I really felt for that. I felt for them. And so that immediately kind of translated into me being interested in larger scale issues that affected, large populations of people. My parents are Iraqi, and I'm the first generation born here in the United States. And so I had already kind of been predisposed to a lot of the issues that were going on in the world. Really, the first one was Palestine and Israel-Palestine conflict, and growing up and hearing stories about neighbors of my parents that fought in wars, and people that had died, and all that kind of stuff. And then obviously the Iraq wars were just a huge influencer for me, and really fueled me through college, where I started to kind of blossom as more of a political activist. But really, the environmental side of things, I think, was also a product of the bullying and stuff. Because I didn't have a lot of friends, I spent a lot of time by myself, right? And a lot of that time was outside, and I developed really strong bonds with other non-human animals. So, be it birds, I had a bunch of birds growing up, just about everything. My poor mom, if there are any other Arab folks on the call that have tried to get a pet, how difficult it can be to convince your parents to let you get a pet. Well, my poor mom, she defended me. She got me through a lot of arguments with my dad, and I won basically all of them. I think the only thing I wasn't able to get was a snake, I think, but I had basically everything else. So, that kind of, those two things ended up combining, right? Later on in my life, the kind of this desire to stick up for people that were getting trampled on, or being disrespected or discriminated against because of who they were. And then my passion for the environment, right? And it coalesced into this really awesome position that I'm in now, where I'm an attorney, and I work for the Great Lakes Environmental Law Center, and we're a really small org. There's only 3 of us, but we are in being small, we have just developed a real tenacity, and I love that, right? Because it allows me to really push back, and fuels a lot of the work that I do day to day. I could go on forever, and I'm really happy to, but I know that that the lieutenant governor's on too, and he's probably got a tighter schedule than I do. So I'm happy to turn it over to him, and I really would love to hear any of your questions or comments, and kind of continue the discussion going forward.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bashi, and thank you everyone for sharing these inspirational stories. Your honesty and transparency in vocalizing your experience is truly empowering to us. Before we begin the Q&A portion for tonight, it is my honor to introduce our next speaker of the night, Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist. Our Lieutenant Governor has dedicated his career to fixing problems for hardworking families, campaigning for equality and justice, and using technology for the betterment of our society. I would like to welcome Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist to give his unique perspective on how to think about environmental justice, highlighting the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Please welcome Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist.
Zaina, thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. Go Blue. It's always good to be here with my University of Michigan family. Since I do so much work in Lansing now, I got to deal with a lot of Michigan State people. And so that's one of the toughest parts of my job, including the governor who went to Michigan State. But nevertheless, we are here, and I'm thankful to be here with you. I do want to hear more of this war with parents to get a pet story. That sounds like it was pretty interesting. I have small children, a 19-month-old and twin 7-year-olds, and they haven't asked me for a pet yet. My default answer is going to be no. So I'm trying to really hold off on that. but nevertheless, on more serious matters, I mean, I think, so much of my identity around political action, while it was, forged and sort of bred into me from my parents, who were very active in my neighborhoods in Detroit and in Farmington, where I grew up. My childhood split literally in half between those two cities. But when I was on campus at the University of Michigan, I was there from 2000 to 2005. And so our, undergraduate LS&A affirmative action admissions policy and the law school's affirmative action admissions policy went on trial all the way to the Supreme Court. And when I was a student there in the College of Engineering, I was a double engineering major at Michigan. So, but I saw and was able to work with students who were here with me to organize a student response to that in support of the policies that, use race and other factors to determine who would be able to come to Michigan and be successful. And while we got a split decision in the Supreme Court on that, but it was really important that I was able to organize, buses to go to the Supreme Court for our day in court. I ran an organization for Black men on campus called HEADS, which still exists here, earning a destiny through honesty, eagerness, and determination of self. Meets every Monday, 9:00, South Quad Amatana Lounge. I don't know what's happening during the pandemic, but I know the organization still persists and it's still important. And so that was just important to me as a student, but it also sort of helped me find my voice as an activist. And even after I left college, I left the state. I was gone for 9 years total. But when I moved out to Seattle to be a software developer by day, I became a political blogger by night and started blogging in 2005 and was sort of talking about current events. And, it might be weird to think about this, but the political blogosphere in 2005 was a very different thing. And so for me and my two best friends to start this blog where we'd see 3 Black dudes fresh out of college writing about politics in public was not a common thing. But what that did, though, is using my voice. And I'm not going to claim I was this amazing writer, but just putting ideas out into the world helped, attract me to other people, for, in my case, in progressive politics and in progressive organizing, who were doing things that I didn't know were possible. I didn't know that people could have a job as an activist. I didn't know that was a thing. I had a real job as a software developer, and then you could do this activism stuff on the side, right? But I met people who were working for environmental justice, and these were things that I had, I thought these were problems and issues, but I didn't have language for them. I didn't know people who could articulate, what I was thinking or what I was feeling, or to help me help pull that political power from people. And so ultimately that became inspiring to me. And I left my good job at Microsoft to become a community organizer in 2009, working on issues on social, economic, racial, and environmental justice all across the country. And this was working on campaigns, everything from, cleanup projects for water contamination to, holding polluters accountable. And I think a lot about that even, in my work today as lieutenant governor. I live in Detroit. I live next door to the zip code with the highest rate of asthma in the state of Michigan. And that's because of our proximity to a giant oil refinery, in Southwest Detroit, and the other polluters alongside it that are really dumping millions of portions of poison to people in Detroit, people in Dearborn, and our other surrounding communities in this part of the state. And so for me, now in this leadership position alongside Gretchen Whitmer, we think it's really important that we try to use the tools at our disposal to do 2 things. To one, to have an impact for people who need to see results and need to see, wins now, for people who if you're breathing bad air, you need to stop breathing bad air quickly. For your sake and for the sake of your children and your neighbors and the community. But we also want to make sure that we're taking actions that reflect our values. And so you're seeing that in our administration when it comes to not only polluters being held accountable, but all the stuff we tried to do along water infrastructure. We've taken action to move an oil pipeline out of the Great Lakes. We've announced investments in clean water infrastructure. We've settled the Flint water crisis lawsuit. Like, we tried to do things to try to deliver some modicum of justice for the people who've been wronged by environmental catastrophes and by bad actors who have made choices and investments that have led to the pollution and poisoning of people. And that's not what we should do. That is not good stewardship. And that's something I learned from those handful of SNRE classes I took when I was on campus. Making sure that I had a sort of holistic understanding of the tools that people have at their disposal to have an impact. And so I guess what I would say is, for me, this journey toward justice needs to be multifaceted. And we also must recognize that, people, I believe this, and this is what makes me a Democrat or whatever, but like, people, I think inherently, I think we have some compass that we understand what is just. Like, I think that actually exists within people. And then it's over time, or over a set of experiences, or over what we're taught, is how that can get corrupted or how that can be taken off kilter. So I think our responsibility is to always seek to find that center of justice. I mean, I believe that as a political organizer or as an activist, it's our responsibility to help people see that within themselves. Like, I don't need to necessarily like convince a person that they need to be empowered, because people have power. It's my job to remind them that they are powerful, that they can impact the things that they want to see change in their community, and then help them point in a direction that will have that impact be significant. Like, that's my job. That's what I did for 5 years as a community organizer. So what I'm trying to do as Lieutenant Governor of Michigan, and what I'll be trying to do for the rest of my career. And that applies to issues of environmental justice, economic justice, racial justice, just access to equitable education, and everything in between. And so I think that's one of my guiding principles and governing principles that I'm trying to work toward. And I'm certainly hoping that we're making some progress.
Thank you so much for sharing, Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist. And I have to say, just personally speaking, I'm still undecided. I'm in my second year at the University of Michigan. And I always worry about choosing the right path, thinking that it's going to be one path I do my entire life, but it truly, really isn't. And just hearing from your stories, like, you started off one place, but you like develop into different things, you adapt to different things. Just it's really, truly inspiring, I have to say.
Can I say something about that? I mean, like, look, everybody has a plan. Like, I had a plan, right? Like, my plan was to graduate from engineering school. I was going to go to Microsoft. I was going to work there for 5 years, quit, go to business school, move back to Detroit and start a business. It was a good plan, and I followed like none of the plan. Like, I didn't work at Microsoft for 5 years. I sure didn't go to grad school. Elected official wasn't in the plan. Like, none of these things were in the plan. But as long as you soak up all of your experiences that you're going through in the present, like, it's going to prepare you for whatever you need to be prepared for. So, just know that. And I know it can be tough not knowing, feeling rudderless, but you're not rudderless. Like, you're going to be guided in a direction.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. So let's transition into the Q&A portion. I do see there are some questions in the chat. I just want to point out in advance that Dr. White-Newsome will have to leave us a little early today. So if there are any questions directly for her, please just retype them in the chat so I can see them at the bottom. So our first question is, okay, and this is for each of the panelists. Whoever wants to answer can go ahead. Did you have any mentors along your self-discovery and career journey who helped you in some way?
I'm happy to chime in on that. I've had so many, like, it's kind of hard to even pick one. And each one, I think, played a role at a different time and gave me something that I needed in that time, but a lot of them were educators, a lot of teachers. In college, I went to Oakland University for undergrad. And we had a joke that my degree was the Epstein Matthews degree, because basically I took every single one of these two professors' classes. They were just so helpful, and I learned so much from them. And then later on, I decided to go back to school. After I had already got my undergraduate degree in international relations and history, and then went to law school, I was like, well, maybe I should do something different after I'd practiced law for a few years. And I decided I wanted to go into the sciences. So I went back to school, got an associate's degree in biology, and applied to veterinary school, and did 2 years at Cornell vet school. And it was while I was there that really my another mentor that I was able to bring into my life, Robin Radcliffe, was another professor. And he really helped me. Sorry, my cat is going to be meowing here because I'm not giving him attention. But he really helped me kind of figure out the next steps. When I was in classes in veterinary school, he noticed that I was the one guy that was constantly asking about, like, yeah, but how, I get the science behind this, but like, what about like the impact that this has, right? Like on the animals, on like, what about the policies that would impact these types of decisions, things like that. And he's a veterinarian. He is the one of the, you've probably seen him on a bunch of documentaries. If you've watched on any documentary about rhinos, he's like a rhino doctor. And he pulled me aside one day. He was like, "What are you doing here?" He's like, we need people like you doing this work in the legal field, and you already have what you need. Like, why are you racking up all this debt and like going through all this stress when you could be doing the work right now? And he took me under his wing, and I taught with him for a couple of years at Cornell. And it really helped both, I think, me figure out what the next step was, and like to merge my interests into where I'm at now. And it also helped me build up some experience that helped me get to the position that I'm in now. So really, it's like educators, to me, they're usually just like the greatest people on earth already. But that's what they're there for. They want to help you and they want to see you succeed. And particularly those that they see they really want to change the world, and they want to help you do that. So I really, really encourage you to take them up on the help when they offer it.
I'll make a comment. I've been thinking about this a little bit lately, and this might sound a little disconcerting, and I want all of you to keep in mind that I am several decades out of college now. I was glad to hear Garlin refer to SNRE, which no longer exists. I think I was there 10 years before you were, Garlin. But I would say my experience at U of M, especially in grad school and in my career, was one where I never really did find a mentor. And looking back, I do have to wonder how much of that had to do with me being female. And when you go back to the 90s, I think things are changing. I think they will continue to change, but I definitely felt like there was a lot of sexism in sciences and in government and a lot of the places that I worked. And, I feel like I never really did find that mentor. And, part of it was because maybe I became a mother and then I had all these other things. You'll never know for sure. But one thing I would say that I think I started doing as I got a little bit older was really becoming inspired by women who were younger than me, and were going out and doing things, and serving as both a mentor to them, but also learning from them. So I would say the mentorship thing to me has been a weird journey. And, especially to the young women here, if you can find somebody who's gone through these things, and dealt with the sexism that's in every aspect of every professional field, even environmental justice. Find those people, talk to them. It may take some more being proactive on your part to reach out to people who may be willing to help you or nurture your career. But I would say, that's kind of been my experience with mentors. Certainly people have inspired me, but as far as having a close relationship with somebody who really nurtured me, it hadn't really happened.
Yeah, I guess I just add so many mentors, but I want to lift up a couple of folks that have transitioned to heaven. So my first, I would say, mentor, particularly in the environmental justice space, was a man named Cecil Corbin Mark, who worked at We Act for Environmental Justice in Harlem, New York, for many years. And what he taught me of many things was really leading with love. And so at that time, I was the director of federal policy for our DC office. And, in so many ways, getting an environmental justice voice into the federal policy space, working with federal agencies, trying to bring together majority-led, white-led nonprofits to understand what these folks were talking about. In everything that I did, I was always reminded of Cecil saying, lead with love. Even if you're saying something that might challenge something, say it in love and lead with love. I also want to uplift Mama Lila Cabell, who Detroit, just a water warrior. And when I moved and ventured into philanthropy again, which is a part of my circuitous path, when you talk about money and how you use your power and privilege for good, she reminded me at the start of my career that regardless of how much money you have, we don't own the water. We don't own our natural resources. It is a gift to all of us. And so whatever you do, Jalonne, make sure that you honor that in everything you do. And so I so appreciated Mama Lila sharing that with me early on in my career in philanthropy. And then the work that I had done in environmental justice, particularly on federal policy, with Cecil's words of leading with love. Because I think as you think about the importance of mentors, they come in all different shapes and sizes and colors and creeds. And so I've had white men that have been some of my strongest mentors, again, when I was as an engineer, working as a chemical engineer, because I was the only little Black girl in Fort Worth, Texas, working in a chemical plant for many years. So I think being open to different types of mentors, but also, as Nina said, there are some mentors that have kind of gone through your path of being a mom and juggling school. And I think reaching out to those folks is super important. So mentorship is something that I don't think I recognize the value of it, but as I reflect back, I have had so many mentors, starting with my parents and my grandparents.
I just wanted to support what I've heard, what the other panelists have talked about with regards to mentors. And I really like Jalonne's statement that they come in all different shapes and sizes, because that for me was what I wanted to talk about, just how different mentors looked to me from, as Jalonne pointed out, starting with my grandparents and my parents particularly, all the way to someone who might have just been working in that space longer than myself. So someone like Jacoby Wilson, I spent a lot of time learning from him. Though we are peers, but he's been in this space longer than myself. And so I had the opportunity to learn from him about environmental justice in this space. I learned from students while I had already transitioned. There were students who were really engaged and really involved. So what I want you to notice doesn't have to be someone ahead of you. It could be someone just making a difference in that space. And so I learned from students themselves who were, I wouldn't say younger, but in a younger trajectory than myself. I learned from them as well. The other last thing I wanted to say, because I don't want to reiterate what's already been said, is that I also learned from those who were not mentors to me. Because the people who may not necessarily support or encourage you along the way are teaching you something too. And so I was able to learn from those people as well. So I know we speak when we talk about mentors, we talk about it in a very positive light. But I think there are lessons. I just wanted to point out that there are lessons to be learned as well from others who may not serve in that role, but are teaching nonetheless.
Thank you for sharing. We have two more questions that I want to squeeze in before our time ends. The second question is, what would you say is your greatest or what is your greatest or proudest accomplishment?
I'd like to kick this one off. So I said I left my career in software development to go work in community organizing in Washington, D.C. And by far the most meaningful thing I've done as a professional was I met a young man. The organization I worked for was called Center for Community Change. It was an economic justice and immigrant rights organization in Washington, D.C., based there in D.C. And I ran a campaign that was about comprehensive immigration reform. We were working to try to tell, more human stories to try to break through this, like all of the racism and xenophobia that surrounds the immigration reform conversation. And I met this young man named Yves Gomes, who lived in Maryland, who was a senior in high school. He was from Bangladesh. His parents brought him to Bangladesh from Bangladesh when he was 3.5 years old. His parents came and they were undocumented. Both his parents had been deported in the previous 2 years, and Yves was slated to be deported right before he graduated high school. He was living with an aunt and uncle. He was a caregiver for his first cousin who had very, very severe physical disabilities. And I worked with him and his family and to help get them legal representation to stop this young man from getting deported the day before he graduated from high school. And, he has since, gone on and gone to college and is just like living a good life as a professional here in this country, doing his thing, working for his family, healthy, happy. It's not like he's not like the president of the United States, but like this was a young man who would have been, taken back to a country he knew nothing about unjustly, and working to help make sure that he could stay here and live his life as the American that he truly is absolutely the most important thing I've ever done as a professional.
Thank you for sharing. And our last question is, one audience member is asking if you could give tips for getting a job in the environmental justice or environmental health career straight out of undergrad.
Straight out of undergrad? It's possible. Anything's possible. I think honestly, like to me, the way that I see it is that I encourage folks to be well-rounded, right? That a lot of times the hyper specialization, like society kind of pushes us to do that. But really for something like environmental justice, you have to have an understanding of just how the world works. And you don't do that by putting your brain in a small silo. And I think generally that's kind of where education has pushed folks. So I definitely encourage you to explore other topics, and don't think about like, well, I want to be a doctor that focuses on this stuff eventually when I become a doctor. You should start learning about these things early, right? And like incorporate it into your work early on. And that's like one thing. Someone else said, Nina said volunteer. You want to talk about that, Nina?
Sure. Yeah, I think that there's only so much volunteering you can do. Your time is finite. You need to have money to live. But to the extent possible that you can, work with organizations and donate your time and talents that will get you, that will help build the relationships that you will need to then get the jobs and find the opportunities. Yeah, real experience, but not only the experience, it's all about too the relationships that you build with people. I think, one of my kind of New Year's resolutions, we all have our I do my gratitude journal every day kind of thing, and I'll hopefully keep doing it and not quit at the end of February. But I try to record like one real connection I felt like I had with somebody during the day, and that is so hard right now during COVID. But whatever you do, you will connect with people, and those authentic connections will be what leads you to the next step and where you need to be.
Thank you so much for sharing. And also there's some great advice going in the chat: volunteering within your community, giving back to people in your community, getting real experience. Definitely very valuable advice. I wish we could continue this discussion all night, but unfortunately we're all out of time. Thank you to our panelists for joining us tonight. We've learned so much from you all and are inspired to take the lessons we heard from you today and apply them to our own lives. To our audience, thank you so much for listening and engaging in discussion tonight. Please help us by completing this quick evaluation form that's shared in the chat box right now. We would love to hear your input on how this session went. Also consider following us on Instagram at EHRA Dearborn for updates on upcoming events and opportunities. With that, I hope you all enjoyed this session of the EHRA Talks series. Stay safe and have a great night. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.